Hello, my name is Jerron Vale from the Missouri Department of Higher Education and Workforce Development. Our equity project began a little over a year ago with a vision for addressing inequities and educational disparities for Missouri citizens. The department's desire is to build a careful process for addressing inequities and show our commitment toward equitable outcomes for all Missourians aligned with our vision to empower every Missourian with the skills and education needed for success. The Building Bridges series is an informative look at how Missouri's colleges, universities, and community organizations are addressing equity. We hope you learn from these shared experiences, and thank you again for joining us.
All right. Cool. So Sarah is the co-founder and Chief Impact Officer at ReUp Education. She is passionate about improving outcomes in higher education. Sarah has spent her entire career in higher education, focused specifically on strategies that drive student success and improve college graduation rates. For nearly 20 years, she has created, implemented, and managed student retention solutions at dozens of colleges and universities across the country. Andrew Lyle is a Director of Partnerships at ReUp Education. He helps ReUp's partners analyze the factors that will enable their long-term success serving the adult learner population as they design a partnership strategy based on the nuances of their specific goals. Over the last decade, Andrew has also helped higher education institutions explore and adopt solutions related to retention, student learning outcomes, and accreditation. Andrew holds a BBA from University of Georgia and is based in the greater St. Louis area. With that, I will turn it over to our presenters. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll get started. Thank you, Sarah and Andrew.
Thank you, Jerron. And thanks to everybody who has joined this discussion and conversation today. I see some familiar names and faces. Lovely to see you all. I hope that everyone has had a lovely summer and that everyone is kind of gearing up and looking forward to fall. And I am going to take a second to share my screen so that while I'm chatting, you all have a visual while we're discussing. So what we're going to spend our time talking about today, as Jerron shared, ReUp was founded about 6 years ago, and our organization is exclusively focused on helping students with some college and no degree not only find their way back to school, but also complete. And our experiences and data that you'll see today comes from hundreds of thousands of learners that have some college and no degree from a range of institution types, 51 partners across the country. That includes state systems, 2-year institutions, and 4-year institutions, both public and private. The inspiration for the work that ReUp has done and the topic and conversation today, which is best practices in helping students come back and ultimately complete, has been inspired by a national completion crisis that I think we're all intimately familiar with. And we also know has existed now for at least 2 decades, where we've seen, millions and millions of learners enroll for the first time or even re-enroll, every fall and every spring in order to ultimately complete their degree, only to see the needle on graduation rates hardly move across the country. And this is after and within 2 decades of so much investment, so much expertise, and so much time spent on trying to keep students in school and also help them come back. A few years ago, we wrote a research piece, which you can still find. It's on our website. But we often talk about the learners who, have enrolled once, twice, sometimes 3 times, but remain inactive as the forgotten students. We're going to talk today about what is it like, and what's the experience of learners who, ultimately are not going to complete their degree on a continuous path. What does it take? What does it look like? What are their needs and wants in order to get them over the finish line? And sort of what are the implications for all of us being invested in supporting these learners? And what are some of the strategies that we can all adopt and implement at scale that might lead to moving the needle on completion, not only, for example, in the state of Missouri, but also across the country? So some data just to level set on, the problem at hand. And many of you may be familiar with some of these data points. We're talking about this at a national scale. So there's 36 million Americans with some college and no degree. Candidly, I haven't seen updated data on this coming out of or while we're still in the middle of a global pandemic. The hypotheses of researchers that I've spoken to is that this number, sadly, is likely to increase when we see updated data come out, as the circumstances of the pandemic, essentially have all but required folks to perhaps put school on the back burner, either as a first-time learner or as a re-enrolled student. The crisis isn't just a crisis because students aren't completing, but also because most of these learners have taken loans out to pay for the credits that they've earned. So we find millions and millions of Americans paying down debt on a degree they don't have that was intended to improve their social and economic mobility. It's a moral crisis. And we all, are part of the moral imperative to move the needle and help learners in order to make this right. The some college no degree population, the median age is about 42 years old. So, these are not traditional age students. I think we all know that. I can say, this is national data, our ReUp data, which is about 450,000 learners. It skews a little younger than this, more like mid 30s, where we have students that are, engaging and re-enrolling. But needless to say, we're talking about learners with a lot on their plate, lots of responsibilities, not to mention life and career experiences, while they are likely considering what might it take to complete their degree. Across the board, annually, it looks like about 13% of the 36 million in this category re-enroll at various types of institutions. That's inclusive of 2-year institutions, 4-year institutions, on ground, online, you name it. And we're graduating about 25% of those learners. So, all that to say, a lot of opportunity in helping students find their way back to the classroom, whether that's on ground, whether that's online, or even hybrid. And of course, when we look at states like Missouri, where there's an opportunity to upskill and reskill a population, and move forward the economic opportunity that comes with more educated learners in the state, there's a huge opportunity to improve and to focus on implementing some strategies statewide or even at institutions in order to move the needle on some of these rates that we see nationally. So what does, it's one thing to sort of look at flat data and say, okay, this is a problem. We've known it's been a problem for 20 years or more. That's also had a heightened amount of attention and investment. But sometimes, the data on the paper doesn't necessarily tell the whole story of what's happening with these learners. And so what you see here is a real student, Jamal, who, in my opinion, I think that he described the path of what it's like to be a non-traditional learner with some, who had aspirations to complete in a linear way, in a continuous way, in 4 years. And he put what I think is like really great language around a challenge and a mindset and a problem that we hear from our learners. And I'm sure you all hear from your learners all the time, which is kind of found myself in a labyrinth. I knew I had questions. I knew I had problems. I was not sure how to find my way out of it. Was unclear on how to access the right resources. And there was a lot of shame in trying to accomplish a goal that was important for so many reasons and remained unfinished until the time when Jamal found sort of the right time in his life with the right support to put coming back to college back at the top of the priority list in a way that he could ultimately complete. And in his case, didn't take a lot of time for him to ultimately cross the finish line. We're talking about someone that had, essentially one requirement, but was not sure how to put the pieces of the puzzle together in order to cross the finish line, which has, become a life-changing event for him to get his diploma. So, just I think it's always important to ground ourselves in the student anecdotes and what it's like to look at this problem through the eyes of a student and a learner. And, Jamal put some really fantastic words to his journey and his experience. So what does it often look like we talk about the journey back. What are some of the best practices and what does it take to help learners ultimately complete when they are not going to be in the classroom, whatever that looks like, term over term over term in a consistent way? Here is an example of what a student journey looks like from, speaking to, in our case, a combination of our personalized outreach through technology and also coaching. What is the time frame and what does that actually look like in order to get students over the finish line? Well, a couple of things to note with this visual is one, it's not a quick turnaround. This essentially, marks a almost 2-year time frame from initial outreach all the way through to graduation. And it took a student about 1 year to find their way back to the classroom when the relationship started to be built. It also suggests that students need support in a lot of different ways. You're talking about phone, you're talking about email, you're talking about text. Just like us, learners want to be able to engage and get the information that they need on their phones, on the go, be able to multitask and move forward, perhaps on a lunch break from work. These are things we all know. The intent of this visual, what I hope it illustrates, is simply what does the combination of applying all of those different ways to find and engage with students, what does it ultimately look like? And how much work does it take? This is a lot of proactive outreach. On average, we see it takes 40 to 50 interactions and engagements with a student before they'll ever even end up back in the classroom. And that is because, as we all know, choosing to come back is really a decision about changing one's life. And that's typically done over time with trusted partners and in a way that feels highly personalized and relevant. We all know as educators, as student services professionals, as leaders, as policymakers, as folks who love and support and engage with students all the time, we know that relationships matter. The relationship that we have with students matters, and the relationships that they have matter in what essentially informs their willingness and ability to even consider completing their degree and going back to college. And what is it going to take to get them over the finish line? I can say that at ReUp, we have been extremely data-driven around truly understanding the challenges, the motivations, and the deep, deep understanding of what matters to students over time. We have close to 4 millions and millions of data points around what students tell us, what they're paying attention to, what they need help with, and how we can move them forward. And what we have found, it is a model where we know the 5 most important relationships in any student's life within this some college and no degree population. And we know that at any given time, these relationships can enable a student to want to re-enroll, to be able to re-enroll, upon re-enrollment to persist and eventually graduate. We also know that these relationships can get in students' way. They can be inhibiting and prevent a student from even engaging in the first place, let alone take on the commitment to go back to college. So what are the relationships that we have found are the most meaningful and actionable for this population? Things to keep in mind include the student's relationship with themselves. What we're referring to here is essentially the confidence that they have in themselves, how motivated they are, how well they describe their level of motivation. The student's relationship with the institution. How do they feel about the school or the schools they're considering re-enrolling at in the first place? And what are their memories like? What is their current experience like as they navigate the path to go back to school? What's the student's relationship with finances? We all know this to be important, obviously, not rocket science here, nor a surprise, but I'm going to come back to this one. We've found that the student's relationship with their coach at ReUp is also a hugely important variable as it relates to the relationships. I imagine we're speaking to this from our work in our world. I imagine the proxy for this would easily become the student's relationship with an advisor or student services professional, even a faculty member outside of the ReUp world. I think what this is really illustrating is that students are looking for a trusted partner that will be proactive with them, that will invest in their success, and will be willing to have personalized engagement with them in a way that is meaningful. And then finally, the student's relationship with their outside support structure. So this relates to family, their work. How well does the student feel like they have relationships and support in their life and outside of the classroom? We analyze every day these relationships and the health of these relationships with the students that we support. And in any given day, their persona and how we see what's going on with the student changes based on what the students tell us. So we are taking what students say in email, in text, and through phone calls, transcribing it, and essentially through sentiment analysis, understanding what is the student talking about, which category does it fit in, and how are they feeling at the moment. And what we have found is that the more enabling relationships a student has, the more likely they are to engage, re-enroll, and graduate. And the more inhibiting relationships a student has, the less likely they are to engage, re-enroll, and graduate. So altogether, not necessarily a huge surprise, except what I think is interesting about that is it doesn't actually matter which of these relationships are enabling or inhibiting, simply that out of all 5, there are more enabling or inhibiting. Meaning, and I told you I'd come back to finances, finances can be an inhibiting factor, but if 3 out of 5 are enabling, we still see students at a rate of about 80% engage, re-enroll, and graduate, even if finances is constantly an inhibiting relationship. So We've also found, and happy to go into detail if people are curious about this in the Q&A, that coaching and proactive support, advising, engagement can improve the health of these relationships. So they're not fixed. We've seen students have a very inhibiting relationship with themselves. They start talking to us without a lot of confidence, with shame, feeling like their backs are against the wall and they have no options. But in speaking to a coach and speaking to advisors, whether it be academic or financial aid at the institution, they can start to get more information, build their confidence, and that turns around. Same thing can happen with the student's relationship with their institution. Some students leave feeling like the institution didn't help them, like as if they were wronged. But those impressions can turn around with the right recipe and combination of supporters on the student side. It just takes time, it takes proactive support, and it takes attention. So I am going to hand it over to my esteemed colleague, Andrew, to chat about some additional information.
Thank you, Sarah. So as we've been engaged in this work, helping students return and complete their college journey and understanding them with the level of detail that Sarah just described, we've seen over and over again that although this is a large population, this is not at all a monolithic population. There's a tremendous amount of variation in what's going on in that student's life. And ultimately, you only can get at that when you understand them in a personal way, really, and get a sense of their story and what's going on with them. So we have found that as we're trying to help them, in order for us to be good at doing that, we need to have conversation with them individually about why did you leave? And what have you been doing since then? And what are your career ambitions now, potentially being different than what they were at the time you originally enrolled? And hey, what would having a degree mean to you? And really have a discussion with them on an individual personal level. That's important for us on a couple of levels. Understanding why they left enables us to provide them with personalized support along the journey. So if this is a student that said, I struggled because I couldn't get to this, or I found that this was harder than I expected it to be, well, then there's some resource allocation things that we want to be prepared to guide them to the right things at the right time. Understanding why they want to come back and what their dreams are is also very important, because it's not just a transactional interaction. This is getting at the heart and soul of why they want to do this, and to really know, like, what about coming back and finishing matters to them. And why we need to know that is because there's going to be a moment where this gets tough. There's going to be a moment where there's challenges that are unexpected. And for them to be able to push through that, they're going to have to believe for themselves that they know the why for why finishing this degree connects with the dreams and vision that they have for their future. And so we want to draw that out and articulate that and have a clear vision for that on the front end. And so to get them the right support, to have the right understanding of their connection between their dream and finishing a degree, it matters to know them personally. And knowing them personally happens not so well through surveys. I talk with institutions sometimes about why do you think your students are leaving, and oftentimes the best available data they have comes from exit surveys. And as like there's some issues there with sampling bias and who chooses to fill out an exit survey. And then when they're doing that, if they're in a hurry, sometimes it's very easy to just pick a category, pick a label. And sometimes these stories are so complex, there is no label to adequately say what's going on in their life. And so surveys really give an incomplete and sometimes a flawed picture of why students are leaving. It's the personal conversations that we have with them where we really start to unlock their story, and that makes a difference. So having said that, because we're talking with them about why they left and why they want to come back on a personal, individual way, we've been able to build up a data set about what are those reasons for leaving and what are those reasons for coming back. So we want to showcase those with you today, just as a part of digging into what drives this particular population. And so to start with, I want to give you a sense of the key reasons why students end up leaving. And you'll see the number one reason for more than a third of students that stop out in our conversations with them is life balance. And you see that about 2/3 in that category, we've classified as sort of a personal life balance issue, and a third of those a professional life balance issue. So many times students come to college carrying different levels of responsibility above and beyond their coursework. That could be at home, could be at their job, often a combination. And so when life balance is the reason for stopping out, sometimes they find that adding in college to what was already on their plate just doesn't work as well as they envisioned it being able to work out. That it was more than they pictured, and carrying all of that, it's not going the way they planned. Other times, what we find out is that it was working, it was going well, and then all of a sudden they get new unexpected responsibilities in one of these areas at home or at work, and now it's not working anymore. And so they had a good plan, they were holding it all together, but then their circumstances changed. So sometimes in the professional commitment, it could be they're in the military and their duty station has changed, and so that shifts around their availability to engage with that institution. They're uprooting their life to go to a different geographic place, and that becomes an issue to manage altogether. It could be in the professional realm that just the demands of their job increase. Maybe they got more responsibility at work that they weren't planning on that, and they need that job in order to fund the education, and so they have now too much on their plate. Or it may be a professional commitment where they got to have the job, and the job used to be really flexible on hours, allowed their core studies, but now it's not anymore. And so those are some different examples that we see in this life balance category. But what's really important to know about life balance as a reason for stopping out is ultimately these students are facing a choice about what to prioritize in their life. And they, of course, if this is the reason they leave, it's because they had to choose something that wasn't college. But why that's important to know is when those other life issues can be mitigated or subside or can be addressed one way or another, the drive to go to college was never the issue here. That wasn't the problem for this group. They always wanted to finish college. It was life got in the way. So that presents a kind of an opportunity in recognizing that life balance was the issue. See there, the next category, 25% of students in our experience ultimately have finances as the reason for stopping out. Most students are coming to college paying something out of pocket. Even if you're on scholarship, there's some kinds of costs associated with college. And in some cases, we find that the issues here actually started before college. So it may have been that this student didn't have sufficient support to understand what the actual costs were going to be and develop a realistic plan for how they were going to pay for that as they went along. It may have been that was made worse because they didn't have anybody in their life that could have had that conversation with them. And so sometimes it starts before college. Sometimes it's something that pops up during college. So they may have understood the cost. They may have had a good plan that was going to work for how that was going to happen. But then they had circumstances that changed. So they may have totally lost their job altogether or lost their scholarship. Or it may be that they came to college with one major in mind and they ended up deciding to change majors, which is great because now it's going to align with their dream. But in the end, they're going to need to pay for more credits than they thought they were going to have to pay for. And so that creates more financial reasons, but financial pressure on them. And so that can be wrapped up in an individual student story here. And then the third most common category, we see about 1 in 10 students that we are working with ultimately stop out because of physical and or emotional health type of reasons. So as you would guess, well-being has a tremendous ability to impact not only your success in doing the work of college, but in having a good outlook and attitude as you're engaging in the work. And so when you're in good health, when you have great emotional and physical health, you're going to enjoy college more. And so it's a key factor in the ability to thrive. And one of the things that's wrapped up in it is having a good support network. So when a student is well connected to the campus organizations or friends or family members in their life, when they have those moments which would otherwise be overwhelming to them, it's not so overwhelming because they've got a support network that can guide them through it, and they're not carrying sort of the emotional burden all by themselves. This category also includes students where there was a health issue somewhere in their family. So it may be that everything was fine in their entire college experience, but they had a parent that got sick and they had to stop college to get a job to help support their family. And so those issues can be at play for students as well. In addition to understanding why they left, we want to have a real good sense of what is their motivation for coming back. And so we find that the most common motivation for coming back is in this category. We put it as finish what they started. And these are quite often the students that were in that personal life balance category. They had a vision for why they wanted to have a college degree, what that was going to do in their life. And that's still there. Nothing has changed about that. They just had life circumstances that got in front of that. And for these students, once the life circumstances are out of the way, for them, they want to blaze right ahead, and it's really picking up where they left off in terms of finishing what they started. And because that's the case, they have this sort of internal accountability built into them that we have found is really powerful. Because they're doing something that's meaningful to them, and it's drives their commitment because they've got this dream that they never lost sight of, and so they're well positioned once those life circumstances are out of the way. The next most common is a personal goal. Now, this at first it sounds a little bit like the first category, but there's a little bit of difference. They're both internal types of motivators, but there's a twist. For these students, it's not just a continuation of the original driving force to go to college and have a degree. For them, it's the thought process that has developed and is wrapped up in, I want to be identified as a person that's a college degree holder. That's sort of the lens through which they're seeing this. And so these are students that have set a specific goal around becoming a college graduate, and it's not necessarily even about using the degree. The degree itself is the goal. So you might hear a student in this category say something like, I'm doing this just for me. Or maybe somebody later in their career and say, hey, I've accomplished a lot, but I never finished my college degree. And that's what's driving me to want to do this. And so for them, it's what we call a personal goal. The next category, to make a better life for themselves. So in this group, this is really interesting, also an internal type of motivator. It's not just about the increased earnings that they could have or the leg up at work with a better role in their vocation. You see those coming up next as external type of motivators. For them, it's what they would get through having those things, which is kind of a deep thing to think about, but it's what it would mean for them now to be able to have different circumstances and to find themselves at a different place in life as a result of what comes through the earnings and the job and those things. So it's sort of a deeper way of looking at it, and it is wrapped up in the money and the job, but it's what they get through those things, which is a particularly interesting lens on it. So for them, the degree is like a gateway. And it may be that they want to get their family into a better place to live. It may be that they have a detrimental relationship, and this is going to allow them to get out of that, get away from that. For them, this is creating a better life as a result of what comes through that college degree. And then you see here the two next most common ones. External, we would say, type of motivators, the specific earnings that you would get by holding the college degree, and this is an interesting one to kind of differentiate, because at first these two seem kind of similar, right? They're both career related, but we're able to talk with them specifically about, is it more the earnings or is it more the role? And in the latter case, when it's more the role, sometimes these students, they actually know the specific promotion that they would be able to have if they had a degree. And for them, it's really about diving deeper into the work. They have a real clear sense of what doors would open for them in their career as a result of having the degree. Whereas the earning potential is pretty clearly fixated on the dollar amount. So with that, I will hand it back to Sarah.
Yeah, sure. The next couple of slides, I'm going to walk everyone through. So we, what I think is important about doing this work, and I think I'm gonna make an assumption that we all sort of share in this value, is that, what we don't want to be doing in bringing students back, right, is one, we don't want to be doing more harm than good, right? In bringing students back to complete a degree or choose a course of study or a field where they're going to take on, again, sort of more loans and more debt, and then the end point being they're just going to have to keep paying that down without sort of that credential that's going to ultimately mobilize their earnings, their motivation for the rest of their career. Secondly, we want to make sure that the work that we're doing is having a positive and equitable impact, and making sure that we're, really mobilizing equitable outcomes, something that we know has been sort of a challenge nationally within higher education. And so wanted to share some of our impact data that we have seen in the last 5 years of doing this work. And it's just a couple of slides, and then I'm actually quite excited to get into discussion, and where we can all talk about, the journey to bring students back, best practices, and what it takes. So a couple of slides. So this is impact data related to self-identified gender. So here we've broken it down into the two categories where we have data as male and female. And what you can see is that in our database of 430,000 some students with some college, no degree, we actually have more learners that are male than female self-identified. So it's about 43% male against 41% female. What we're finding is that we're re-enrolling women and females at a much higher rate than the males. So you can see that we're re-enrolling females at a rate of about 52%, whereas the males are re-enrolling at a rate of about 40%. What this graph doesn't show, and I will say is certainly sad to me personally, but coincides with some of the information that we've seen in the last year, is that in fall 2020 through summer 2021, the re-enrollment rate for females and women for us, we've seen a bit of a decline. They were not re-enrolling at the same rate that we had seen in years prior. Much of that due to obligations related to childcare and being parent learners. When we look at race and ethnicity data, this is super interesting. So we see that when we look at our database, the students that are engaging with ReUp coaches and coaching and the institutions that we partner with, it's disproportionately people of color who are taking advantage of the personalized support and proactive services. So 88% of the learners that are expressing an interest to want to find a way and a path back to college. 88% are people of color, whereas just shy of 12% are students who self-identify as white. Now, this is, information that we have that is coming from students and information that they have given us. But you can also see that a sort of a similar proportion is happening when we look at who is also enrolling. Certainly disproportionately re-enrolling more students of color back to college than what we see in our database in terms of white students. And, what we think and what we hope is happening here, right, is that there is real opportunity in, upward mobility, upskilling, reskilling, improving economic mobility for learners of color, for communities that otherwise might have been forgotten or not be able to find personalized support and resources in order to carve a path back. We also know that for communities that are under resourced, it can take a lot of time and energy and attention to craft a plan. Highly unlikely that, single parents, of any race or ethnicity, or, folks who are juggling family and work, maybe multiple jobs, that, within a summer or 6 to 8 weeks, they're going to be able to find a way to put going back to college at the top of the priority list in a way that is going to make them successful. And so what we found is that, an ability to really invest in students crafting a plan that will set them up for success and really resonates with finishing what they started, improving their job and economic mobility, that can take years. And what we've designed, our service to be able to do in partnership with our partners is to be able to take that time and really invest and get to know the students so that they're ultimately successful and cross the finish line. I think, what we're seeing here is that in terms of best practices, that nuance to be able to be highly personalized, highly proactive, and really invest in student success, no matter how long it takes. That's why we're seeing some of these trends that are coming out of our data.
So based on what we've seen, we have some thoughts about what policymakers and institutions might consider doing in light of this. So when you think about what those reasons were that I ran through, they don't align with some of the most common assumptions that people have about why students drop out of college. We often bump into the assumption that most students who leave because of money or because they couldn't handle the academics. And those two categories together, the ones that everybody thinks are the big ones, together, they account for a third of the students that we've engaged with. And of that group, academics is only 7%. It wasn't even in the list that I shared with you of our top reasons. Now some institutions may look at their stop out list and say, well, I've got more than 7% of my stop outs that have a bad GPA. But what we found over and over again is that having a bad GPA is not a signal of a student that has an academic problem necessarily. If your personal life is in crisis, then yeah, your grades are going to suffer, and that shouldn't be a surprise. And so when we collect the data, we as we discussed, we want to get to the root cause. And so even when you talk to a student, when we're having these conversations, the student, the first thing out of their mouth might be, yeah, I stopped out because of money. But then once you dig into what's going on in their life and you see, the full story of, yeah, I had a parent that got sick, or these were my specific circumstances. It wasn't ultimately that finances was the root cause. Finances was a symptom of something else that was going on in their life. And so we say, whatever judgments are being made about how to help this population, it should be done in a way where you've made an effort to really figure out what are actually the reasons that students are leaving. And not just based on a survey that doesn't sample everyone, or the first thing out of a student's mouth. Like there's got to be a way to get at what's really going on. And the implications of this are, if you think the biggest challenge is academics, and you spend money to build an academic support center, when really the biggest challenge was managing personal circumstances, and you could have spent that money on a child care center, well, there's a missed opportunity there. And so there's big implications for understanding what's really going on and how to make a difference as a result of that. And so when you think about what's going on in those individual stories, think about how long it's going to take for students to be able to rearrange their life and navigate a path back to re-enrolling. And think about the nature of once they come back, they're far more likely that now they're a parent. Now they're going to, if maybe they had to work part-time originally, but now they're going to have to work full-time. And so once they're back, it's much more likely that they're going to be enrolled as a part-time student than a full-time student. And so, let's say a student stops out, in their third year of a 4-year degree, and they have this 5-year personal crisis. They've got a year of coursework left, but it's going to take them 2 years to do that because they're going to have to take half the course load that they would have before. Well, when that student ultimately finishes and graduates, which is a great outcome for the institution and a great outcome for the student, the 6-year graduation rate is not going to tell that story. And that's a shame, right? Because that's the story worth telling. And so we say, whenever you're looking at measures of completion, think about to what extent is that capturing students like this? Well, to what extent this thing that we want to promote and say, just because you've been gone a long time, or just because it's going to take you a long time to finish, you should still do that. Are we looking at metrics that are capable of capturing those kinds of successes? And then ultimately, as we're a coaching organization. Coaching is near and dear to us, and so we feel this personally as we're engaging these students, walking through their specific journeys. The reasons they leave at the end of the day are intensely personal, and they need personalized assistance in navigating through that. The most powerful thing is to have someone consistent that they can count on. I've heard an individual student talking about the difference that their ReUp coach made, and they said, what I really needed was a consistent person to walk through this with me. And we see that. And so when folks are thinking about ways to move the needle on retention, like a tool that sends an alert that says, check out the tutoring center because it sees that you got 2 bad test grades in a row, that's not as powerful as having a person in your life that could see, have a conversation with you. And it may well be that the thing that you need because you had those 2 bad test grades is not the tutoring center. That maybe there's a personal, challenge there, unrelated to your academics. And so we say, having a personal advocate, a person in your corner, a real human that can walk through you, it's an incredible opportunity. When that can be made available, it makes a difference. And what's even more powerful is if it's the kind of person that can be set up with a relationship where they're checking in with you proactively. They're not waiting, because the nature of the challenges for some of these students, particularly if it is, say, a first generation student, they don't have another person in their life that they can have a conversation like this with to give them comfort in navigating the system. It's hard for them to raise their hand and ask for help. And so when someone goes to them instead and says, how are you doing? And what are the challenges? It's much easier to connect the dots between them and the resources before it's too late. Because I talk with institutions who get frustrated when they had the right resources, they had the right offices on campus, they had spent the money in the right places, but the students who needed that help didn't go seek it out until it was too late to make a difference. So having a proactive person changes the timeline when the resources get utilized and makes a difference in the impact that they can have in the end.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sarah. And, thank you so much for Sarah and Andrew. Thank you so much for your time. We do have a few questions we'll get into, if that's all right, the time we have left. Let's see. First question is, are people with intrinsic or extrinsic motivations for returning more likely to finish their degrees, or does the motivation matter less than other factors?
Yeah, we have not seen a substantial difference between intrinsic versus extrinsically motivated students and completion outcomes to date. We have seen a slight increase when students are intrinsically motivated. They tend to be more likely to re-enroll. So that is a slight distinction that we have seen. But so that's one component of it.
Okay. Great. Next question is, thank you. Let me see here. Given so much of your engagements with BIPOC students, are you intentionally about hiring more racially diverse support coaches?
We have a fairly diverse team. More than 50% of our coaching team are people of color. And an additional about 20% of our team are stocked out students themselves. And so we are constantly evaluating our own recruitment and hiring practices to ensure that having a diverse team is front and center in alignment with values and also matches the learners that we're supporting.
Awesome. Another comment says, curious about when and how long you engage with students. Are they at the enrollment phase and through persistence?
Yeah, so we begin the conversation reaching out to them to say, is this even on your radar right now? Is this a conversation that you're interested in having? And for some students, the first year, 2, 3 years after they left, it may not yet be the right time. For others, it will be. And so our role varies tremendously. But yeah, we begin with them having the conversation about, is this the right time for you? Do you want to come back? Are you still interested? How are your dreams different? And then we guide them through the process of preparing to come back, which a lot of variation there. Some students, that's a longer journey. So, sometimes it involves saving up money to be able to pay for that, and then re-enrolling, and we stick with them all the way through to completion. And that's really important because as we help them get re-enrolled, we've put ourselves there as this new layer of support. We don't want that to suddenly disappear for them once they're engaged in the really hard part of actually working on the degree.
Awesome, great, thank you. What have you seen in your research about students who identify as non-binary, non-gender conforming, who may not be captured in binary statistics of male, female?
Sure. So what I can confidently say is that the non-binary students are not being well captured in our data. Full transparency in our entire database of 420,000 stopped out learners, we have 2 students who have identified as non-binary. Much of that data does come from what the students at some point chose to tell the institution. And when you consider the fact that our data set has learners that have been out for somewhere between 1 and 25 years, that's also a category that sadly is new. So all that to say, our data does not well represent this population if students hadn't identified as such in the past. We are reevaluating how to better capture all gender identities in our data set moving forward.
Great, thank you. How do you go about reaching out to students or finding the stop outs you serve?
Yeah, so the vast majority of the students that we've engaged with came through partnerships that we've established with individual institutions who asked us to go and do this work on their behalf. And so we're reaching out to them across email, advertising on social media and search engine, text messaging. We want to sort of best set the table that that student can engage in this conversation in a channel that meets with their preference. And so they may have, you know, a series of phone calls with this if that's their thing. It may be a student that wants to email back and forth, you know, and work through the process like that. We also have students that come to us because we are advertising. There's students that, you know, not necessarily attached to any particular institution, but they're saying, hey, I know I want to go back somewhere. And so we can guide them through a journey like that as well.
It's also worth mentioning that even before we do the outreach, we append contact data, because we find that much of our data comes from the institution themselves when we're starting the outreach. And a lot of that information can be out of date. Makes sense, right? Students leave, they change their phone number, they change their mailing address, they change their email address. And sometimes all the institution even has is the student's school email address. And we all know how well that works if students have been out for 4 or 5 years. And so one of the things that we've been able to do is create a proprietary way to sort of append new and updated contact information. So when the question comes around, how do we find them? That helps us to better just get in front of them in the right way with the right information. And we found that that alone helps our, you know, our ability to find students upwards of 30% of the time.
Awesome, great. What proactive measures can institutions take to make their interactions less transactional and more personally engaging?
Yeah, I see this as, I love, you know, the words that I often think about is transactional versus transformational. And what I think is important to do, listen, I actually don't think making this shift that there is a silver bullet. And I fear that sometimes, you know, I think even we are, you know, challenged by that at ReUp or in the various organizations that I've been a part of where we're trying to do more transformational work. Well, my recommendation would be, you know, take a step back, get people around the table who are really interested and have a vested sort of responsibility in engaging with students in ways that could be transactional or transformational, and truly assess what are the moments in time and the ways in which students are either proactively seeking out those supports and resources, or where those people and departments are responsible for proactively reaching out to the students and do a genuine assessment of understanding things like, how could we make our interactions and outreach more personalized? How could we spend more time with students and really get to the heart of what they're thinking, what they're doing, and what they know, to make sure that we're not in those interactions essentially putting a Band-Aid on an issue, when what really needs to happen is a thorough assessment of what is the root cause of a student either considering dropping out for the first time, or a student who knows they're going to actually be leaving, but might also at the same time want to have a plan to come back and stay connected. I think that, you know, requires teamwork and effort and an understanding of the students at each individual institution.
Also, we're going to squeeze in one more question here, and I do think there's a couple more that we have, and if it's okay, we'll forward those to you, Andrew and Sarah. You can respond, and we can get back to the commenters once you respond. Final one here we have is great presentation. Comment says, thank you very much. Do you see students who want to return but can't due to back balance at schools? Curious if you have any info on that.
Yeah, 3 categories here. One, students with a balance of some sort, where we've actually started to see more of our partners forgive the balance or come up with a program for a student to pay it back over time without preventing them from re-enrolling. That tends to still be on an ad hoc basis and partner specific. There's another category where students have a balance. We have seen students work with their coach to pay down balances in excess of $10,000. And they come up with a plan over time to pay it back so they can get down to a threshold in which they can actually sign up for classes again and re-enroll. And we have some of those success stories. But we also have a third bucket of students where they may be in outside collections. That is a category of students in which our service does not yet apply. We do not have, without significant additional financial expertise and resources, we're not a great fit organization for students that fall into that category. Yet we hope to be. And as we've done more work with transfer students in the last year, we have seen significant friction in students being able to get, of course, their transcripts when they want to attend a separate institution and they have a balance that they need to pay down. Most of the time, we found that because we can work with students for as long as it takes, we can help them craft a plan to pay that down, get their transcripts, and craft a path to transfer. But as we can all appreciate, that is a very challenging topic and situation. And, would love to actually hear other ideas and what's working for others around that topic, because I think that it's sort of the next frontier of things that we really need to chip away at as a country and as folks that are really invested in student success.
Great. Awesome. Thank you both so much for your time. I did, if you have any questions, put them in the chat really quick. I did save that and I will send those to Andrew and Sarah, and we'll get back to those who asked those questions. But really appreciate your time, Andrew and Sarah, for the presentation. Wonderful presentation. Thank you all for coming. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Awesome. And we'll be back next month again for another presentation. So thank you all for coming. Appreciate it.